Chapter 1. The Deal. Silas's office was a fortress of silence, a place where the sound of money was louder than the sound of words. But that day a photograph on his desk broke the stillness. It was of Jess, his daughter. A young woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile, holding a sign that read "Home for All." The paper was a newspaper of the day, announcing a charity gala in her honor. Silas stared at the photo. His mind went back to the last conversation he had with her, a battle cry about values that couldn't be bought. "Money isn't everything, Dad. There are more important things, like people." And with that, Jess left, not for a man but for a cause. For her conviction that the family fortune should be used for something more than just generating more money. She had told him she was going to seek funding on the street, and Silas, hurt to the core, had ignored her. "That way you'll realize that no one will give you money without asking for something in return," he told her. His pain was deep, and his hatred grew with each passing day without news from her. A week later, Bastian was moving through New York with a sparkle in his eyes and his head full of ideas, but without the capital to carry them out. The problem wasn't a lack of ambition, but a lack of a plan. And now, his lifelong dream, the only person who truly mattered to him, was at stake. "Anton, I can't do this anymore," Bastian said, collapsing onto a leather sofa in his friend's modern office. His blonde hair, usually artfully messy, fell over his eyes. "Portia's inheritance clause has a limit. If I don't prove I have a solid foundation, the family board will be in charge of choosing a suitor for her. I can't lose her." Anton, with a serious face and an impeccable suit, got up from his desk and poured him a drink. His success as an investor had turned him into a figure of power in the city, but inside, his greatest asset was not money, but loyalty. "Don't worry, Bastian. You're not going to lose Portia." "You don't understand. By next week, I need cash, not promises." Anton nodded. He had a solution. His fortune was not in the bank, but in an investment in a biotech startup that was about to close a multi-million-dollar deal. The problem was liquidity. The funds would be frozen for a couple of months. "I'll get a loan," Anton said, and picked up his phone. The response from his trusted banker was as expected. The operation was secure, but the approval process would take weeks. Too late. Anton hung up and ran his hands over his face, frustrated. "So what are we going to do?" Bastian asked, his voice on the verge of breaking. "There's only one option," Anton murmured, with an embitterment Bastian had never seen in him. He turned to his friend. "We're going to see Silas." Bastian frowned. He knew of the notorious moneylender's reputation, but Anton's expression told him there was something more. "Anton?" "Years ago, Silas and I had a problem," Anton interrupted him. "He's a shark, a man without scruples. But he's the only one who lends in cash without questions. Don't worry, my investment is secure. It will just be a formality." The silence in Silas's office was heavy. The moneylender, an elderly man with eyes of steel, looked at Anton with a mixture of contempt and glee. He had waited for this moment for years. He had been humiliated and scorned by Anton and his social circle, and now his enemy was at his door, begging. "I've heard about your problem, Anton," Silas said with a cold smile. "The money is there, but my business isn't interest. My business is loyalty." Silas slid a contract across the table. "If you don't pay on time," he continued, with a voice that was like the edge of a razor, "you will renounce all personal, social, and commercial relationships with Bastian and with all those you consider your friends. And the renunciation is not reversible." Bastian was about to protest, but Anton stopped him with a look. He was so sure of his investment, so desperate to help his friend, that he considered the clause a simple, absurd formality. He signed the contract with a steady hand and left. He couldn't have known that he had just signed a pact with the devil. Chapter 2. The Inheritance Contest. While the fate of the friendship between Anton and Bastian was sealed in the darkness of an office, the spotlight in Manhattan's Upper East Side was on a very different kind of drama. Portia's inheritance clause was not a whim of her father, but a test. Portia was the heiress to one of the largest technology corporations in the world, but to take full control, the will stipulated that she had to marry someone who demonstrated, quote, unusual value and an entrepreneurial spirit. The board of directors, in an effort to maintain control, had turned the clause into a farce, inviting the world's richest and most powerful suitors to participate in a series of events. Portia watched the suitors parade, their fake smiles and prefabricated success stories. There were men from all corners of the planet: the prince of an Arab country with his oil fortune, a Russian magnate with a fleet of yachts, the heir to a media conglomerate. All of them talked about their achievements, their power, and how joining their empires with hers would be a, quote, strategic alliance. But Portia, despite the pressure, had her own plan. The clause had a loophole. The test was not about money, but about the person. She had fallen in love with Bastian at a charity event, and she knew that, behind his lack of capital, there was an honesty and a passion that the others didn't have. Bastian didn't want her for her money, but for the person she was. When Bastian appeared, the tension in the room was palpable. Unlike the others, he didn't talk about his fortune, but about an art project he wanted to create to revitalize an abandoned neighborhood in the city. Portia watched as the other suitors mocked his ideas. But she saw something more. In the final round, the test was simple. Each suitor had to tell the story of their greatest failure and how they had overcome it. The others told stories of financial losses that, in the end, turned into triumphs. Bastian, however, remained silent. "I haven't overcome my greatest failure," he said softly. "My greatest failure is that to be here, my best friend Anton had to make a deal that puts him in danger. He lent me money from a man without scruples. He did it for me. My greatest failure was not being able to stand on my own." Portia's face lit up. Bastian hadn't won anything, but his honesty and loyalty made him the undisputed winner. The board of directors, despite their reservations, could not deny that Bastian's loyalty to his friend was the unusual value the clause demanded. Portia chose Bastian, and the audience, moved by his honesty, applauded. But the happiness was short-lived. Days later, a devastating email arrived on Portia's phone. Anton's investment had been compromised by a legal dispute. The money was frozen. Anton couldn't pay Silas. The threat of the contract loomed over them. The fairy tale was over, and the legal drama was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Debt of Loyalty. The urgency of the email broke the bubble of euphoria in which Bastian and Portia found themselves. The news that Anton's investment was frozen, with rumors that it had been completely lost, spread through New York's social circle like a virus. The smile on Silas's face turned into a gesture of triumph. His plan, the slow and painful revenge he had cultivated for years, was about to bear fruit. Bastian, reading the news, felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't just for his friend's anguish, but for the guilt. Because of him, Anton had risked his fortune, and now their friendship. He ran to Anton's office, hoping the news was a rumor. "Anton, is it true?" Bastian asked, his voice trembling. Anton, with tired eyes, nodded. "There's no liquidity. The patent dispute is freezing everything. I won't be able to pay Silas on time." The deadline was just 2 days away. Bastian and Portia, with the money Bastian had received as a prize from the contest, tried a solution. Portia, with a determined voice, made a series of calls. "We offer you double the loan amount," Portia said, with her phone pressed to her ear. Silas's voice on the other end of the line was a growl. "I'm not interested in the money," Silas replied. "The contract is clear. The clause is activated on the deadline." "Don't be unreasonable," Portia said, her voice firm. "The contract is no longer valid. The money is here." "The contract is clear," Silas repeated, his voice like a venomous whisper. It doesn't specify that the debt will be settled by a third party. It doesn't specify that I can receive payment after the deadline. It only specifies that Anton, and only Anton, must pay. And if he doesn't, his friendship with you and your friend will be broken. Portia hung up, her face pale. Silas didn't want money. He wanted revenge. It was the first time the brilliant lawyer had felt completely powerless. The final confrontation took place in Silas's office, on the eve of the deadline. Anton, with Bastian and Portia by his side, faced him. Silas, please, Anton said. What do you really want? Silas, with a victorious smile, stood up from his chair and looked at the three of them. Years ago, your friend and his circle humiliated me. They mocked my business, my methods. They told me I wasn't worthy of being in their world. And you, Anton, the richest and most powerful, were the one who mocked me the most. You took an important business from me due to a legal technicality and left me bankrupt. You took everything I had from me. And now, it's my turn. Anton, hearing Silas's words, felt a chill run down his spine. His arrogance, his contempt for Silas in the past, had now become his enemy's most powerful weapon. The memory of his own words, "It's just a formality," hit him like lightning. Silas, you're right, Anton said, his voice hoarse. I was an arrogant man, believing that money was everything. But Bastian's friendship, Portia's loyalty, they are worth more than everything I have. I've realized that money is not the measure of a person's worth. And what hurts me the most is that because of my arrogance, because of my blindness, my friend is about to lose the happiness he found. Anton's revelation and his humble confession did not move Silas, who responded with a cruel smile. Your repentance is late, Anton. The contract was signed with a purpose, and tomorrow, at midnight, it will be fulfilled. Bastian, hearing Anton's words, understood the seriousness of the situation and his friend's sacrifice. Portia, on the other hand, watched in silence, her mind working 1,000 miles per hour. If Silas had acted this way out of the pain of humiliation, and for revenge, perhaps the contract could be broken. Using her resources, she had everything about Silas investigated. She reviewed the contract over and over again, looking for a way out. The clause was too cruel, not only for him, but for Bastian, who was suffering from the prospect of being separated from his friend, as well as feeling guilty for leading him to the situation. Chapter 4. The Trial. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, businessmen, and members of Anton and Silas's social circle filled the seats, with their phones ready to capture the outcome of the drama. The judge, a man with a severe demeanor, presided over the court. Silas, with a smile of smugness, sat opposite Anton, with the contract in his hand. Anton's lawyer had tried every tactic, but the contract was unbreakable. The situation was clear. Anton had defaulted, and Silas's loyalty clause was a real threat. Your Honor, said Silas's lawyer, my client is here to have a contract enforced. Mr. Anton has not paid his debt, and therefore, the clause he signed, the renunciation of his friendship with his social circle, must be effective. Anton, with his head down, could only nod. He knew he had lost. It was then that the courtroom door opened, and Portia, in a black trench coat and a leather suitcase, entered. She walked with her head held high to the defense table and stood next to Anton. The judge, seeing her, frowned. Miss Portia, said the judge, who gave you permission to enter? Your Honor, I'm here to present a new argument, Portia said, her voice calm but firm. The contract is valid, but the punishment cannot be executed. Silas burst out laughing. And who are you to decide that? I am the defense attorney, Portia said, as she took some documents from her suitcase. They were a draft of the contract. Mr. Anton is willing to pay the debt. But my client has not specified a form of payment. The contract does not say that the money must be in cash. My client has offered checks, bank transfers, and Mr. Silas has refused to accept them. The judge, surprised, leaned in to see the documents. Silas, his face pale, stood up. "That's a technicality. The contract is for money, and only for money." "Exactly," said Portia. "The contract doesn't specify a time. The clause says that loyalty will be broken if the payment is not complete. But Mr. Anton has offered the full amount, and Mr. Silas has refused to accept it. The debt has not been settled because my client did not want to receive the payment." The room was filled with whispers. The journalists, with wide eyes, began to write. Portia continued. "And there's one more point. The contract does not specify a duration for the renunciation of friendship. A single second of repudiation is enough to comply with the law. If Mr. Silas wants his pound of flesh, he can have it. But the law does not allow him to take more than a single second of his loyalty, since a duration was not specified. Friendship and loyalty cannot be bought." The judge, visibly impressed, addressed Silas. "The contract is a legal document," the judge said, "but the clause is so vague and ambiguous that it cannot be enforced. The law requires a contract to be clear and for both parties to agree to the terms. In this case, Mr. Anton has tried to pay, and Mr. Silas has refused. The debt is settled. The renunciation of friendship cannot be enforced." Silas's face twisted with rage. The revenge he had planned for years had slipped through his hands due to a technicality. "But, Your Honor," Silas murmured, "this is an injustice. Mr. Anton humiliated me." "Justice is not revenge," the judge said, his voice firm. Anton, hearing the judge's words, sighed with relief. The nightmare was over. He turned to hug Portia, but she stopped him. "There's one last point, Your Honor," Portia said. "I asked the court to order a fine for Mr. Silas for damages to my client for his attempt at extortion. A fine of 50% of his assets, which must be returned to my client." The judge, hearing the request, smiled. "The request has been granted," the judge said. "Mr. Silas must pay a fine to the victim for his attempted extortion and for moral damages." The room was filled with a murmur of excitement. Silas, his eyes full of anger, sat down, defeated. Chapter 5. The Reward of Mercy. The victory in court felt bittersweet. Anton, with his head down, could not celebrate. He knew he had won a legal battle, but he had lost something more important, his humanity. He felt ashamed of the arrogance that had led him to humiliate Silas in the past. Portia, despite her brilliant defense, noticed the sadness in Anton's eyes. "Silas is not just an enemy," Portia said softly. "He's a hurt man. He lost his daughter." Anton was perplexed. He didn't know about Jess. He felt overwhelmed with guilt. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his mockery of Silas was not about business, but about his ego. Now his only desire was not to get revenge on Silas, but to make amends for his mistake, and the opportunity presented itself as he left the courtroom. Silas, alone and defeated, left the court. The press surrounded him, with cameras and microphones ready to capture his humiliation. But Anton, with the help of Bastian and Portia, pushed his way through the crowd and approached Silas. "Silas," Anton said with a humble voice, "I accept the fine. But I'm not going to collect it. I don't want your money. I want something more valuable." Silas, surprised, looked at him. The anger in his eyes had turned into a trace of curiosity. "What do you want?" Silas asked, his voice broken. "I want you to reconcile with your daughter," Anton said as he took a document from his pocket. "I want you to give me permission to fund your daughter's project. I want you to help her get what she really wants, not what you think she needs. It's how I can compensate you for the harm I caused. It's my way of asking for your forgiveness by giving you back something you lost." Silas, hearing Anton's words, felt a lump in his throat. He was speechless. For the first time in his life, someone offered him something without asking for anything in return. Anton didn't want his money. He wanted to make amends for his mistake and help his daughter realize her dream. Silas, his face full of tears, got down on his knees, grateful for the kindness of his former enemy. "Mr. Anton," Silas sobbed. "I'm sorry. It is I who should apologize. I was a fool. Money is not everything. Friendship and kindness are worth more than gold. You have taught me a life lesson." Anton helped Silas to his feet. The journalist, seeing the scene, fell silent. The drama was over, but the real story was just beginning. Silas's money, which was part of the fine, was invested in a charity fund to help young people realize their dreams. The fund's name was Jess, and with Anton's help, Jess founded a shelter for the homeless, a place where young people could find a place to live, study, and create their own ideas. The place was in the center of the city and was called Home for All. Anton and Bastian, for their part, became the best of friends and continued with their lives. Bastian and Portia got married. The executives who doubted Portia's abilities were convinced of her skills when they saw how she won a lost case. Bastian's project, that of revitalizing a city neighborhood with works of art, was a success, and over time, his name became synonymous with loyalty and kindness. Silas retired. Although at first it was difficult for him to change his way of acting, little by little he adapted his attitude to life. He spent his days helping young people with their projects, sharing his knowledge and experience, giving this a new meaning to his life, and great satisfaction in helping others with his experience, giving him joy and pride in seeing those young people accepting his teachings and prospering with his help. Over time, he reconciled with his daughter Jess. In the afternoons, he and she would sit down for tea and laugh. And one day, Anton visited Silas, not to ask for a favor, but to thank him for the life lesson. Silas, with a smile, told him, "Money is not everything. Kindness is the true reward." And as something no longer necessary, Anton received the news that the patent lawsuit was dismissed, and he was able to access his investment gain, even greater than expected due to the boost in the stock price, due to the favorable ruling. However, it no longer brought him the same joy and relief as in other times, because he had grown as a person, he had matured. He now valued his friendship with Bastian and Portia more, which he almost lost, forced by a contract. He discovered himself capable of forgiving and making amends for his mistakes, and of turning an enemy into a friend. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please give us a like, leave a comment, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell